We already did Billy Boyd as Peregrine Took, and of course we did Baggins, who's portrayed by that old man. I forget really. Um, sorry. These characters are some of my least favorite, but they are so important to the movies, especially the original trilogy. Baggins kind of has like a strong sequence at the beginning, very strong. He seems almost like he's the main character for the whole ship, for the whole thing. He is, but he seems like it. Then he sort of space and memory. He turns back and he's sort of like a return format window. He's not really affecting the outcome of the story. He does give steam to Frodo. He's consequential, sort of. But really, it's a minor threat. He's a C character. Honestly, the less of him is almost like the better. But I do think he has a purpose, so he's not like a D. He's just, his purpose is rather weak and filler-esque. He's a filler character to some extent. Sort of grandfathered in because he was the main character in The Hobbit. Billy Peregrine Took is one of my favorite characters, but I can admit that he's not the most consequential character. Billy Boyd does an excellent performance of portraying him as sort of this meek, childish, whimsical, fool who has a strong comic relief contribution. But it gives me a little pause when I reflect on it, because in the novels, his character is presented more as an everyman, still with the whimsicalness, but just not as heavy-handed about it. I think the films did a lot to sort of underwrite him as a sort of a simpleton. But in particularly like more so than Mary, even though they're basically in the same league. They do different things, but they more or less have similar contributions. Maybe Mary a little bit more. We'll get to that when we do. I do respect him for rallying the Ents together, or at least raising awareness to Treebeard so that he can rally the Ents for them. And then he did take down Denethor, which was quite the accomplishment. Or he contained Denethor's anger in the face of grief, which was important because Denethor was a loose cannon. As you find out later in Return of the King, he becomes like the ultimate loose cannon, throwing himself off the White Tower or whatever, and nearly killing his second born son, Faramir. So Pippin has an interesting role. He's not as connected as some of the other characters, but by the end of the story, he's a lot more connected than he was starting out, which is charming. But he's a B- character, and I would give him a C+, except for the fact that I do quite like Billy Boyd's portrayal, and I think that he's too funny to be considered a C character. Whereas Bilbo Baggins isn't really that funny. He's sort of a structural character in many ways. There's a scene where he gets mad and pulls out and tries to take the ring back from Frodo. A scene where he confronts Gandalf about the ring, tries to hide it from him. That's all sort of funny in an offbeat, in an unintentional way. Good acting for sure, but I don't think that makes the story that much stronger for me. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. It's fluff a little bit, but it's decent fluff. It's high quality fluff. It straddles the line between fluff and substantive structural, components. So moving on from these two characters, which are sort of good ones to get out of the way, I think, because I think they're kind of mid. This guy, very obscure. He is the prancing pony sort of clerk, bookkeeper. He's like the manager. I don't know. Forget his name, and I definitely don't know the name of the actor. But he's like a F tier because he fucking he confronts the characters. He just sort of starts out as a curiosity, and then he sort of is the main obstacle because he doesn't do anything to force all the ring race from intruding on the bedroom that Frodo ostensibly is in with the ring and his friends, with his friends, right? So him in half because he's entirely structural. He's only there for one scene, plus a shot of him hiding from the remix while trying to sleep in his pajamas. Um, basically an extra for all intents and purposes. But it's interesting sort of, short story being written about this kind of guy. I'm sure he's seen a lot of interesting things, but just not an important character. Along the same lines is Sam White's she's the love interest. I think it's Molly. She's like a barmaid. Also, she has no dialogue whatsoever. I find it funny that she's sort of shoehorned onto this list. But, if there's a photo of her from the series that I put her on, I didn't make the list. If I did, I would not include her. Unlike, she's basically almost a write-off to make Sam Wise seem like a heterosexual, basically. And it was effective. But that character overall. What is it's a similar name for sure. She's like a chick version of she kind of has like an interesting structural role where she guides people and she reminds people of the gravity of the fellowship. But she just sort of dissipates into the background as part of the ether and doesn't do a lot except have this sort of ambient moodiness, which is kind of like below. So this character, I mean, in the books, it wasn't even her that stays right at the gate or at the river. It was Black Orphan, not Gilgalad. I think Orphan, but the book is Gandalf stipulates that like this guy can't be part of the Fellowship. He's too powerful because he had slain a Balrog and been brought back to life, and he lived in half in the undead world, in the unseen world as they call it, in the seen world, and he was just too mystical and too prominent a soul to be kind of, for lack of a better term, to be part of the Fellowship, which was necessarily a sneaky operation, sort of like a death squad a little bit. So she was sort of written in as a more important character than she was in the novels, let's say. But as far as the films are concerned, she's like Bilbo level, like somewhat structural but memorable too. This guy is deep, and it's unfortunate because I like his style, but he kind of confronts the Fellowship. I forget his name, dude. This is the Lothlorien elf leader, who was subordinate to Galadriel, and was it Kellum Brimborn? No, it was her husband, whose name I also forget, but he was also barely in it. He was there for like one shot. But this guy dies at Helm's Deep, and he's sort of lieutenant to Galadriel from Lothlorien, and he leads the elves at Helm's Deep, and then he dies sort of tragically. It's sort of a sad story when he dies, but it's also sort of a distraction tactic to get you to not realize that so many characters didn't die at Helm's Deep. That it was sort of bad writing, and having him die was kind of like a tacked on death to round out the dramatic emotionality. So he's D because he's not only is he structural, but he's tacky too, which is unfortunate because he's got really good style. There's probably good art direction there. Okay, next one we have is Elrond. Elrond's B. Unlike his daughter Erwin, he's a really decisive, strategic mind throughout the whole thing. You do get the sense that he's sort of leading the charge at the grand strategy level, even if he's detached from what the Fellowship actually does. He shows up in an interesting way in the Return of the King, and he presents the sword reforged to Aragorn, not unlike Bilbo bringing Sting to Frodo, but Sting is an irrelevant blade in many ways, but an interesting and curious one. The sword reforged represents everything about kinghood and the kingdom of Arnor and Gondor collectively. Those kingdoms collectively. the Men of the West, right? So Elrond is a very good strategic person. He also has an intriguing flashback where he confronts Isildur about not throwing the ring into the fire, literally at Mount Doom. So even though he's a background character much of the time, he seems to sort of help enfold the story into a narrative that's cogent and has a strong direction. More so than Bilbo. Bilbo is sort of a lackluster drag character who drags the story but doesn't propel it. So structurally, Elrond does a lot more, I think, and that's why he's like a low B minus character. This guy is some elf. I don't remember. So he's trash. He's F. Galadriel, great. Galadriel is the complement to Elrond. She's a low B, very good sequence with her, very powerful strategic character. Uh, Not quite at the level of significance for some of the other characters we're going to get into, but she surpasses Bilbo and Arwen in terms of her viability and shaping the story. But the ring of power in this TV series, she's like given that a lot. So everything has to be Tolkien. She's kind of in Tolkien, TV film verse. She has lots of good things. I guess even I think she's not. I don't remember if she's as important, to be honest with you, but she's a part of it. She has this weird inspiration of all the people in the fellowship. So she is instrumental to getting the fellowship to move past Gandalf's demise. So that really helped propel the story, even if it relied on fancy magic for you stuff that was sort of the supernatural or whatever. It does propel the narrative more and helps with the grieving process after the leader of the pack is slain by Balrog. This guy, my mistake. These guys, wait, is this a character? Is this a character? I think this is one of the husband Galadriel. I think only wow, like the Madison character was the husband, and he's an F tier because he says like he has like two lines in a very well done scene, but he has two lines and then he just out of the whole story forever. Effectively, obviously in the background, but doing all the paperwork, whatever. Okay, next one is for what is sort of like a as because he has the same facial expression. Whatever was his name, Elijah Wood, Elijah Wood has the same sort of annoying facial expression throughout the film. So that precludes him from being an S tier member, but I do think he's undeniably like that high level. And he did a really good performance as playing a bright-eyed sort of hapless youth. In the book, in the novels, he's he's like 42 years old or some such. But you don't. But he doesn't age as fast as a human because he's a hobbit. So he looks like he's sub 20 or whatever. I think a lot of the hobbits are a metaphor for teenagers, right? And he does sort of come across as super youthful and naive, and that naivety is what helps with his ability to destroy the ring because he doesn't understand how powerful it can make him on some level, or he doesn't appreciate it. So the naivety almost helps him. It's like this innocence, but it's a special form of innocence that only he has, and in any other situation would probably be a foible. But for just the express purpose of stealthily going to Mount Doom and destroying the ring, it worked ultimately. So he's an A character, and he's in all three movies. Elijah Wood does really good acting. It's a pretty he's a pretty rock steady character. It's just not my favorite, but I don't think this. I think the series would be totally fucked up if he weren't in it. And he had a different actor. I mean, and of course you need him for the entire, novels and films, no matter what. But he's just not my favorite character, even in the novels or the films. Like I said, I'm kind of rambling about it, but you understand. This guy, okay, who is this guy? Is this guy, that guy's some ranger? He might have been, oh, you know who he is, I think. I think in The Hobbit, he was the guy who shot Smaug with the arrow and pierced the one part of Smaug's body that didn't have a scale and killed Smaug effectively. I'm not sure how that would work because he's a giant dragon that probably, even if he didn't have a scale, the arrow wouldn't do that much, but it works in the story. Um, he's like a D character, honestly. I mean, he just doesn't have that much personality. He's certainly structural like Bilbo or Arwen, but he just doesn't have any personality, and it just throws off the mood. And that's kind of good. You don't want a strong man like that to have a lot of personalities in a lot of cases, but I think if you're gonna make a movie, you shouldn't make him as boring as possible. You should make him, use your imagination a little, right? And that's just good craft. So he's a D, and he could have been a C or B, maybe a B, but definitely a C. Denethor. Okay, Denethor is a personally, I think he's A. Um, Not because I like him, but because his acting is really strong. His role is sort of he just sort of steals the show. I think if you didn't have him, the series would be would be far more boring. Um, like you could take out Galadriel, and it would. Now I'm thinking Elrond and Galadriel are like C a little bit, but I mean, fuck. Okay, I'll put him in B just to be on the safe side. I don't think he. I think he's on the level of like a Galadriel. Like you take him out, you just sort of throw off the whole series, and ends the franchise kind of has less appeal because he plays to a certain emotional range that no other character was really playing to, except for maybe his son Boromir in the first film. He's kind of the Boromir of the third film, but even worse. Okay, one of my favorite characters of all time, underappreciated, of course, is Éomer. He's the nephew of Theoden, and he's just like this, intense martial artist character that just always wants to fight and is very good at it. And he seems sort of like this natural born leader, but he's a little too rough around the edges to be, like sustain his leadership. Um, Except in sort of a diminished capacity as the leader of the cavalry. Is he a C? I think he's a B. I don't know. So that's a good, somewhat preachy but very honest um, role, and that's a B at minimum, because I don't think the movie would have really been broadly appealing unless you had that kind of feminist sort of brash character, shoo-in that she ended up being, and she avenged her father to to honor her, and that's sort of a more human part of the story that gets sort of brushed over in the larger context of destroying this ring, which is like this world consequential thing, but like honor is kind of the key to it. So it's like a subplot, but it's a really good one, tasteful. So she's better than her cousin Aomer, although I feel like Aomer is cooler, but who cares, right? Um, Faramir. Okay, Faramir is kind of a combination of both. He's cool, but he's more consequential. He effectively doesn't do too much really, except sort of observe and report as a ranger, leader of the Rangers, which I guess is good. He loses Osgiliath. He's kind of a loser. But then he does this weird thing where he gets his dad to go sort of insane, and then his dad kind of ends up dying, and that sort of relinquishes command of the city to Gandalf, and that means the city's in more capable, wizard leadership, right? So that's pretty instrumental, if in a sort of an ass backwards bullshit kind of way. He's also just like like a decent. He was sort of the best commander at the time, and he sort of in the background was keeping Minas Tirith afloat. I don't know how much that matters for the film, but you get the sense that he was a necessary sort of above average leader, somewhat generic, but not without charm, and still kind of a loser. Um, he's definitely better than Aomer, and Aomer is kind of at the top of the sea, so I would say he's a B minus. This guy, I like this guy. This guy is he has a very distinctive look. You keep thinking he's going to be in the movie, and then he sort of vanishes. I think he got killed by like a warg or whatever. So because of that, he's like a D character. But he's like Aomer's homie. He should have been like he looks like a C character, but he effectively ended up being a D character. Um, Kind of like the elf who died in Minas Tirith. And he's good acting for the little dialogue he has. He's quite good acting, and he has quite good physical maneuvering. Like he just kind of looks the part. So I just feel like he as a structural character, he was really good, even if it was more ambient than it probably needed to be. Probably could have done more actual stuff. I'm sure they cut something out in the final cut, but in the theatrical release, he kind of doesn't do a lot, and in the extended, he doesn't do a lot either. So, unfortunately, very good style, very good structural sort of character. I think one of the main things he does is he forces the party entering Edoras to like relinquish their weapons, and after that he kind of doesn't do anything except die. That's sad but true. This guy, the king of the death, whatever it is, the king of the dead. Okay, well, this guy is like a D character. I mean, yeah, he's the king of the dead, but he's like he says like one thing, has some maudlin perspective about vengeance or whatever, or being restored or restoring some oath, and but it's all like special effects, and then he kind of shows up on the boat later on, storms of mystery, sings the day with the insect talking. It's pretty mechanical. Like, yeah, so mechanical character, pretty good performance for how little the actors in it. subtle character, like the guy to the diagonal lower left, like these two in the scene. This guy was sort of the Rohan version. This guy was sort of the Gondor version. These guys like the captain of the guard or whatever. And he's sort of just like this grim looking Gondorian. He doesn't say much. And he's sort of just there to like look vaguely competent under the rest of the city being besieged. I think he's actually he's the head guard. It's not the captain of the guard necessarily. He's the head of the palace guard. So he's sort of following Death around quite a bit. He's not a senior character. I mean, he's very like structural. Like even the cases, I understand what this is. Let's just say we didn't know what their characters, but he's kind of a loser. You know, he has moments of truth, moments of revelation, whatever it is, glory. I don't know what you call it. Like he moments of awakening. But I think his character represents a lot of people. I think he's actually the most human character in the story, if that makes any sense. I mean, he sort of like has all this responsibility and he just doesn't know what to do with it. And I think that's like everyone can relate to that. And even though it's a good day, I just think it's a really good character one. You know, it doesn't happen that the older actors get much better, more richer sort of characters with vast emotional range and sort of stuff like that. So even though he kind of has a lame arc, he does have really good moments that round out the story and give meaning to the films. In the books, he's not as cool. I mean, he's cool is a strong word, but in the books, he's not as what do you call it? Front and center. There's not like a lot of scenes where he's like, showing you his like personality and his sort of perspective on like running the show and leading like the free world and stuff. That was kind of what the movie tried to do. In the books, he's sort of like a blowhard, warrior captain personality, with this sort of like pride and being like a leader of men. It's just sort of two-dimensional in the books. As far as I can remember, at least. He's also not in it as much as he is in the movies. But he does die at Pelennor Fields, which is cool, and actually that pertains to a real historical character, I believe, called Theodoric, the Ostrogoth or the Visigoth or whatever. At the Battle of the Catalonian Plains against Attila the Hun, the Romans were allied with the Goths, and one of the Goths died. The leader, I mean, the captain died, and then Attila like sort of retreated, and that was sort of the inspiration for Pelennor Fields. I don't know if it's true. I have no like verification or evidence for this, but it just seems like the only battle that would be high stakes enough for it to resemble Pelennor Fields, and it just sort of has a similar line of events running through it. The order of the battle, as historians call it. Anyway, military historians. The next character is Aragorn. Aragorn is like S, I guess. I used to not be crazy about Aragorn, but there's something cool about Viggo Mortensen's acting where he has this vague sense of competency, even if he's like a homeless person. And I think it takes a lot to convey a lot of skill and character to convey that in a movie. And he does. I mean, Viggo Mortensen does that, but then the character is also just always in the film and always competent, and it's I think, just way better than Frodo. He has more range than Frodo. More, he has to be this masculine, confident character that's not very expressive, but at the same time he is expressive, and that's not easy to do necessarily, to be both expressive and not expressive. So I think that puts him S tier. I don't want to get into it too much though, because I also admit that he's sort of everyone knows he's the best character in a way. It's like he's the return of the king. The king returns, and then at the end he has this cool speech about wolves and shattered shields and the hour of doom or whatever, and the failure of mankind. It's like really dramatic. Um, and then all the way up to that scene, he's got like good moments. And I think Vigo put a lot of effort. Like there's that anecdote about how he kicked the helmet and broke his toe, but then he just carried on acting, and so they kept it in the film. And that's just like a commitment to a role that's like really compelling, and that's the necessary commitment to make a role really stand out. And Viggo Mortensen did it, and he didn't even get an Oscar. I don't think he got an Oscar yet. No way, but he did that, so it's pretty cool. Okay, next guy. This guy looks like a Hobbit character. He might have been one of Aylmer's buddies when they storm when they sort of encircle the trio who are chasing Merry and Pippin. But he's entirely useless. Like he has no speaking lines, I think, and he just looks like Val Kilmer, but he just doesn't act. He is not really in the movie at all. So F for the anonymous character. With forests and swamps and caves and fiery netherworlds. It's like ick. But you can't deny that he's the actor's name. I forget. Andy Serkis, pretty interesting actor. Has a great resume. Brought this character to life in a way that was necessary, and this character could have been flat, really, but like you could have done it and probably gotten away with it somewhat. Maybe, but then the movie would have been a little bit like the Grendel, Beowulf movie didn't work out. Like he'd been like the Grendel character in Beowulf, sort of like could have been great, had a lot of great makeup, but just sort of was flat. So it was a make it or break it character, and it made it. But I just don't. Part of me just doesn't really care that much. Like I would have been fine if this movie was more like a Braveheart than it was like a Tim Burton movie, and it became kind of a mix of both, which was I think the more effective choice. But just personally, I wouldn't have minded that much to see like a fantasy version of Braveheart, which this movie sort of was leaning into. Um, so I'll give him a B plus. maybe an A minus, but really, it's like it's just because of how ugly he is. I give him a B plus. Okay, fuck it, A minus, because it's just too important a character. Okay, now, next character is this orc guy who we see at Kirith Ongol, who is like sort of unaware about Samwise. He's got some funny lines that give you insight into the psychology of the orc. But other than that, he's sort of a structural character. It's decorative. I mean, he sort of scares away Frodo and Sam and Gollum. That's about the best he can do. And I don't even think he does it for long. I think Sam just sort of wrecks him because as far as orcs go, this guy was kind of a pussy. And I don't even know if he had combat experience. You know what I mean? It's like one of those stolen valor Marines that never saw a battle but just wears the fatigues everywhere. That was this guy, but an orc form. Um, but he's funny, man. I'll give him a D. I'll give him a C. He has strong personality. Those orc characters, it's no one. It's like it's thankless work because no one can recognize you for doing the acting, but then the acting really carries itself. This guy's also like that, but I don't know if this guy's a C. This guy's a little bit of a he's structural and he's intriguing, but he doesn't say anything cool. And I think the dialogue is what makes or breaks a C character from a D character. I mean, this guy he dies in a exciting way, and he sort of takes command of Pelennor in an exciting way, and he's just sort of an exciting character. He looks like the most heinous hellspawn that you could ever conjure up, but he doesn't really do much except sort of showboat his ugliness. So let's look at he's a little bit like this guy, the King of the Dead. A little bit like the King of the Dead. Okay, I have a lot more characters. I didn't know how long it would take me to get to this guy, but I'm glad I got to him. I think his name's like Gorm or something. His name sounds like Worm. Um, and definitely don't know who the actor is. Okay, Grima Wormtongue. Forget the guy. Um, well, you see it, but you don't see Gandalf, so it's half implied. Um, He's like a C. He's like the same as the other orc. A very interesting, strong performance, and then just sort of disintegrates into the background, or just dies, and it just becomes okay. Next one. This guy's a B. This is probably the highest ranked orc. He's an Orakai, to be fair, and he kills Boromir, which is not something everyone could do. And that kind of gives him this intrigue, and then he is obviously slain by Aragorn shortly after he kills Boromir. There's a good sequence or whatever, like a snippet of a scene where he's like, spawned out of the earth, and he's inspected by Saruman for like whatever the Orcok flaws or whatever. I don't know. It's all kind of heavy-handed. Acting's decent. He's a little bit like this Gorm guy or whatever. He's like a more effective and less structural version of this guy. I'm sure the Gorm character could have had more like going on. He almost kills, I think, Eowyn. So I guess I'll put him in B. I guess I'll put him in B because he does almost kill Eowyn, which would have been tragic. Not necessarily consequential, but it would have been tragic. And this guy killed Boromir, almost killed Aragorn. But then this guy also didn't lead anything at Pelennor, whereas this guy not only led Pelennor, but he took Osgiliath back, or he took it just in general from the. He just took it at, like, point blank from the Rangers who were stationed there. Next guy. Oh, this guy's also similar. I like this guy quite a. This guy's also a B. He has some good lines, and he's a really weird character. And if you didn't have him, I think the film would have been like sort of lame. Would have markedly been less cool. The Mouth of Sauron. He's also a person. He's the only human agent of Sauron that is still technically in a human form. In the whole, he might be an elf actually, like a dark elf, but I don't think so. I think he's a human. It's one or the other. But he's a race of Middle Earth, and he's still in the same form technically, which is really intriguing. Um, and you don't know, and there's nothing to learn about him. Just sort of strange, cadaver-looking guy who gets decapitated in one fell swoop by Aragorn, mid-sentence no less. It's kind of badass. Okay, the ring itself. Okay, I didn't make this list, or this set of images. So I made a list, but I didn't make the set of images. So whoever put in this ring is annoying because the ring is not a character. It sometimes has like when people gaze at it, it'll like say things to them, but that's just like the inscriptions, or that's just like Sauron talking through it. It usually doesn't, as far as I can, as far as I know, it doesn't like speak for itself or anything. They do imply that it has its own personality because it's just so mischievous, and it's a scoundrel, for an object for sure. So I'm gonna give it an F because it's not really a character at all. Boromir is S. Boromir is the foil of Aragorn. He's everything Aragorn kind of would be if Aragorn was like wasn't like a fucking like miscreant. I mean, Aragorn's advantage is that he's like disconnected from everything. That's why he's able to do this stealthy mission. Boromir is not stealthy enough to do it, but like, in the context where he has to be stealthy, Boromir perhaps would have been a better leader because Boromir had more direct experience with the enemy. He had a station like this. He used the leadership from the races of the men who were kings. Yes, so sorry, I was distracted by the social message. Boromir is, I think he's a great character. I think he has some really being first film, and he really shows character is like indispensable. You can't have Lord of the Rings without that sort of sub villain who has a face and is actually like walking around and living and breathing and kind of meddling with things, but doing it at a level that's not even the real scale that you actually have to deal with under Sauron. So Saruman sort of he's this microcosm of Sauron, and that's really unusual in a series like this. At least it's unusual for it to be super effective. Like you can see that Count Dooku doing the same thing. I think they literally tried to do the same thing with Count Dooku, and it worked, but it didn't quite work as well as Sauron. In fact, Count Dooku dies a similar death to Sauron. It kind of dies a similar death. Saruman, I mean, sorry, Count Dooku and Saruman sort of die in this sloppy sort of like dismissal from because they're no longer relevant, they're no longer the main head honcho of the bad guy team. But I think Dooku was when he died, it was, and they also died at the beginning of the third film, and so it's like it's all there, and it's the same actor. It's like really the same sort of message. But I think with Dooku, he seemed more on his way out because Grievous was I mean maybe it was just the publicity from the time, like the marketing. But Grievous was sort of a known enemy walking into the theater, seeing Revenge of the Sith. So you kind of walked in thinking, oh well, Dooku's probably not going to stay in too long because this Grievous character is the main bad guy. Whereas with Return of the King, Saruman had the potential to just sort of like vanish without a trace and should wind up somewhere else, go to Mordor, whatever. Like he sort of seemed like he had more wiggle room. Like he had the human, he just all his. I mean, I guess he was stranded in at Orthanc, but he's like a wizard. He probably could have figured his way out of there, right? What they made it look like is that he just didn't want to abandon ship. Dooku was sort of tricked in the moment by his superior to sort of die, to sort of get killed. The opposite happens in Return of the King, where Saruman is tricked by his subordinate into dying. So he's actually sort of stabbed. He's actually literally stabbed by his subordinate. So, and they both die horrendous deaths. I mean, and then Grima I think dies on the spot, kind of. Maybe not. Who knows? It's never really revealed. Obviously, Darth Sidious, takes the rest of the movie to get vaporized by electric shock therapy or whatever, and then in the original trilogy he dies at the end. So he goes on way later, like 4 more movies it seems. So I think because we know Darth Sidious lives, Dooku's death is less significant, whereas Grima kind of dies too, or seems to. And so Saruman's death is sort of like more like, ugh, it's more gruesome because of that. Even though when he falls on a spike, like it's almost like it didn't even need to happen. Whereas, yeah, I mean, Sidious tells, or Palpatine or whatever, he tells Anakin to cut his head off. But that's because it's verbal in a verbal instruction. It sort of it's stored. It's theoretical. It's up in the air. It's less of a visceral reality, less grounded. And literally, Saruman falls into the air and dies. So there's an up in the air quality of that too, if you want to get really hermeneutical about it. But I think there's a lot of parallels. I mean, it's just literally like the same sort of arc. But I think Saruman's death was more of well, what it really is that his death wasn't included in the theatrical release. They just they didn't really have it. I think they didn't have his death. Maybe they did, but his death was not as um, front and center as it was in the theatrical release for the Revenge of the Sith with Dooku dying. So I think there's an edge to Saruman's character, and also obviously Saruman is less of a his character makes more sense in the story. Count Dooku's character is like this count who dresses like this, aristocrat. It sort of makes no sense. Like, why would there be a count in like a science fiction setting? Doesn't It's like sort of asinine, but it works because Christopher Lee is just such a tremendous actor, and there's all these different weird things going on in Star Wars universe anyway. The galaxy is kind of funky, so it makes sort of sense. But even but like even but it would make more sense in the original trilogy. But in the prequels, that kind of like funkiness, it didn't really exist. So you're sort of watching it like, okay, you have Count Dooku and Boss Nass, like that's pretty funky, but that's about it. You know, I mean, the clones and the fucking, I guess the robot army is sort of separatist army is sort of stupid too. I don't know. I guess the whole thing was pretty stupid. So, but that's the thing, is those were kind of stupid movies, whereas the original trilogy for Lord of the Rings was less obviously stupid. It's stupid in a way, but it's not like tacky stupid. It's stupid because it's like a goofy fantasy genre trilogy. The genre is kind of stupid, but like the the um the the consistency in the actual presentation was better for sure. More smooth, more classy. Um, Next character, Sauron. Okay, I guess it's alphabetical, right? See these lists, they give you these icons and it's all alphabetical. So you get Saruman, you get Sauron. It's cool in the movie, but when you do a list like this, it does kind of hammer in how simplistic the writing could be. Um, Sauron's kind of an S tier because he doesn't exist, but he at the same time he's omnipresent. He exists everywhere and he spies on everyone. And he has these palantirs that communicates through, and so he's like the Invisible Man kind of. And that's just a very smart idea, you know. And he's like physical reality, but he's also not. He's kind of like all over the place in a way, but it works because he's just kind of so scary, just so scary. The eye in the sky just looks across hundreds and hundreds of miles just to see anyone anywhere. It's just it's very original. Oh yeah, and of course they have the eye in the sky as a character too, which is bullshit. Like because the But if we're going by Rings of Power, I'd give him like a C. But because all he is like a cool armored dude who gets wrecked by Sauron with a giant towering Sauron with a giant mace, give him a D. The Balrog of Moria, Morgoth's Balrog, right? I'll give him a C. Just just really structural but awesome. Sort of averages out to C. Don't know who this guy is. I guess that's Gilgalad or whatever, or the leader of the elves, right? I'll give him a D just because he's super BA. Merry. Okay, reaching some kind of fulcrum here. Start with Pippin. Now we're at the midpoint with Merry. What do I say about Merry, dude? I said so much about Pippin. It's like it's obtuse. Merry is like God's gift to no one. I mean, he sort of helps kill the Witch King. He sort of helps inspire Treebeard to take up arms against, Saruman. So he's sort of his comic relief. Dominic Monaghan, right? He's sort of doing something all the time, but then he sort of actually never really does. And he's almost like this like false sort of hero. Kind of wants to be a hero. He's very self-serious. I think it's part of his charm is how self-serious he is, despite not having a lot of capabilities. I mean, even Aomer is kind of like, man, this guy's too short to fight, and then he ends up fighting and ends up getting wrecked. But he does stab the Witch King, effectively leading to the Witch King falling over, effectively leading to Eowyn just stabbing him in the face, stabbing his spirit in the face. So that's consequential. It's a little bit like Pippin getting Denethor to throw himself off the White Tower or whatever, with the White Tree or whatever, and fly through the plummeting in a blaze of glory or not glory or whatever. Well, I give him a B because he's the counterpart to Mary. He's everything Mary is, but he's the Rohan version, to put it really simply. Next guy is young Bilbo Baggins from The Hobbit. Yeah, well, he's like a C. Fuck that movie. Okay, this is the guy who dies. I forget his name. Thorin Oakenshield. This guy's a tool. I'll give him a D. I'll give him a C because he dies. This guy's sort of a clown. Balin, right? Durin, whatever these names. They're all the same, dude, I swear. They had no differentiation. They never said anything different. They all looked the same and they said the same type of shit. That was the problem. They could have looked the same, but as long as they said different things, but they all kind of said the same level things. Maybe they had to look different too. I don't know. It's hard to make dwarves look different. They're typecasted. Another shitty dwarf. Another shitty dwarf. This bald guy is a little bit better. I remember him being kind of funny. This guy is also probably a little better. Samwise Gamgee. It's pretty sure that guy had the lines. The trolls, thought the trolls get Davy because they had some really good comic relief that was effective, even if, predictable origin. The direction, the acting there. This is this is the Gandalf. He's also in the Hobbit. Once, that's Gandalf's power. Gandalf thing. I think somebody about who Gandalf is. I mean, it's like, we're watching this, right? Gandalf's policy is a little, he's like incompetent as Grey or whatever. Grey is like, Gandalf the Grey is sort of allowed to just, get things done easy. And then he sort of proves himself at the last minute when he like says the ball out of the ball. When he's setting the ball out, he sort of like let everyone stray, even if they like him a lot. So he kind of has like a turn around and like, it's a shit. I think he like revitalized after he says the ball out, and he like built it up right, and then he's like hyper confident. He's confident that people accept him. And then he just kills it. I mean, at least leading the defense of Minas Tirith. It's kind of the main thing he did. Oh yeah, and also saving the day at Helm's Deep and rescuing Theoden from his madness. I mean, so he did like 3 really great things as Gandalf the White. He sort of confronted Saruman. Maybe that's 4. I don't know. 3 things, but that's a lot. It's not 3 things no one else could do. This guy is Radagast. Okay, Radagast was like basically he could have been way cooler, but he ended up being like a structural character. I'll give him a C just because he fucking he towed the line. Is this Legolas's dad? Legolas's dad is he's kind of a C. He kind of does a lot of cool fighting and stuff, and he has like one really epic line, and he sort of has a tone of seriousness. And as far as I remember, in The Hobbit, he wasn't an annoying character. He kind of led the elven faction, so that's great. Oh, this is the elf chick who has the love interest, who's the daughter, who's like the sister of Legolas. She was kind of cool. She gets to see. Is this? Who's this? Jeez, oh man, these guys are okay. I'm giving this guy. This guy looks like the guy who killed what's it called? The dragon. I thought that this guy was, but it might be this guy. So I'll put him in D just in case. Same rank. This guy was annoying. He's F. He's shit tier. He like plotted against the good people in the town that was gonna had to kill Smaug and was threatened by the 5 armies. This guy looks like, oh, this is the giant who lives alone. Yeah, this guy's like boring. I'll give him F tier. He was in like one scene. He just basically just gives them a bunch of food and kicks them out. Pretty lame. This is a kid who's from that town. Might be a woman actually. That looks like a kid. Basically structural. Yeah. This guy was mechanical. If you know, this is structural. This is mechanical. Mechanical means they do something cool, but it's like it's something only they could do, and it was something that lended to one thing happening. But beyond that, it was like um like they were irreplaceable but boring. That's kind of what it means. Mechanical structural means that they were replaceable, but they had more of a function than being ornamental. They could kind of like they were kind of, their role was necessary at least, but it wasn't interesting. And an ornamental character, some of these dwarves are definitely ornamental characters as far as I can remember. I mean, maybe if I had didn't have if I had more ADHD, it probably would have zapped around and paid more attention to the fucking Hobbit trilogies. I swear you had to have ADHD to follow those. Um, guy's really good. Next to there's goblins, yeah, the troll king, whatever this guy, like blonde hair was, Galville, the troll king swing, I think we'll see. He's pretty fun. He, he's the highest level comic relief. I guess the elf is that, because the elf would be funny. Gimli's sort of like the mid-level comic relief, and that is the four levels. There's Gollum, there's Hobbits, there's Gimli, there's Gandalf. Gimli's like the soldier side, the combat side is the comic relief. He's definitely not level one, especially the dwarf. Like Boss is saying, you can't deny that like Boss is like, I think that Hobbits is a pretty good character in the Hobbits. I mean, that's like, you just have to get the responsibility. Okay, all these characters I don't recognize look like ornamental or structural characters. Goblins, Giggle, cartoons, there's cartoons only, and this is Spock, I guess, and She-Hulk. This is art. Right? This is Chaos Force, Shadowfax, Cave trying to find Moria. You can see with the Troll King is pretty interesting. Which is interesting, which from his behaviors, his activity, his violence, the Troll King is interesting, his personality, but almost very even. Just funny that's how it worked out. She-Hulk is not interesting, but She-Hulk was better than nothing. At least Sheila had to fight for its life, right? You know, her life. Shadowfax. Okay, Shadowfax is a little bit like this dwarf dude who's just sort of ornamentally cool looking. Shadowfax is sort of cool looking. Shadowfax gets a C, just by dint of a reasonably good structural rule. And yeah, I can't even finish these. I know this is like the main villain, so I guess I have to use him from The Hobbit. As a villain, though, he was like a C. It was pretty awful. Just it would have helped if he weren't like a total cartoon. These are the dwarf kings. So I think the witch king is this guy. I can't see it. The colors aren't processing on my computer screen. Yeah, they just don't process. But the witch king is one of my favorite characters. I'll give him an A. The only reason I won't give him an S is because he doesn't do a lot. He's not in it that much. But he's just everything he does is like noticeable and awesome and terrifying and kind of traumatizes the soldiers and he scares the fellowship every turn and he's always one step ahead of them, it feels like, and he's not even like the main bad guy, but he sort of embodies it, but he sort of doesn't. He's in a league of his own, but at the same time he's too mysterious to even say that. Like you don't know if he's in a league of his own. I think he ultimately was, but just based on his background, but you don't know that. You think he's just this like cautious and calculating subordinate of Sauron, and he's so powerful on his own right that it's like wow, like you could make a whole movie just about him. And in some ways, the movie was kind of just about him. I mean, the third one especially. Um, okay, that's it. How long did I go? An hour and 13. Okay, I did one yesterday. It was 2 hours, but that one was like the first one I've done in a while, maybe over a year. And that one was on rock bands, which is like there's so much more to say about like a particular rock band that one ended up being slow at first because I would just ramble, and then I ended up just rushing through it, and it was 2 hours 15 minutes. This is not even at an hour and 15. But these characters, there's only so much you can say about them, especially if you're just going off the movies. The movies might be gospel to me, but they're not everything in the world, and there's only so much depth you can read into it. I guess if I was more of a visual artist, I could comment on like the cost, the makeup and the costumes and the structures of these guys' faces, the skin quality, and goofy, girly stuff that I don't think anyone wants to hear from me. But it would be nice to at least know some more than 2 cents to say, have more than 2 cents to say about it. So let's review this real quick. In F, we have a bunch of. By the way, everyone who's not listed was just like too annoying for me to even worry about. I think this is a subordinate, like one of the main subordinates, like the assassin of the main bad guy. So I'll put him. I think for what he was doing. Such, nymph being raped on the sands of the Aegean or whatever the fuck, some kind of, West African chant character and Egyptian, heroic, phallic representation. Just something I don't know what I'm getting at, but it's all just a bunch of rehashed, folktale nonsense, English folklore. The three trolls under the bridge. Oop. Yeah, not very original. Tolkien, for all his originality, those trolls, their lines were good, but their actual existence was like hackneyed. Anyway, but that's the Hobbit for you. It's basically just the more straight-laced Alice in Wonderland, right? Through the Looking Glass, right? Lewis Carroll was like a pedophile. I mean, imagine that. Imagine like the Harry if J.K. Rowling found that J.K. Rowling was a fucking pedophile. Is that on the level of Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, being considered a pedophile? I don't know. Maybe. I think he might have been at the similar level of a similar magnitude in the popularity and sales and all that. But I'd really have to look at the numbers. And I'm a little tired, so I probably won't do it just for you on this podcast. But you know what? Fuck it. Just for you on this podcast, I'll look up Lewis Carroll versus J.K. Rowling just to see what their pedophilia, like C.S. Lewis is also thrown in, J.K. Rowling, sorry, J.R.R. Tolkien, J.K. Rowling, C.S. Lewis thrown in together, Lewis Carroll. I think Lewis Carroll popularity. We can admit that J.K. Rowling's extremely popular. Okay, I will admit that. But how popular was Lewis Carroll? He was like a mathematician and a pedophile and some kind of like Oxford snob. But he probably was popular. His books are, well known. Yeah, it seems kind of creepy just reading about it. He was like Peter Pan. They compare him to Peter Pan, that he loved little girls but wouldn't marry them. Just saying that is like a red flag, I think. I don't know, maybe they know something I don't. It was like the Victorian era, right? I don't know, maybe did I guess he lived into the 40s. Or maybe no, he died in late 1800s. January 14th, 1898. But in the 40s, they like reevaluated his stature because of all the pedophilia. Um, kind of conflict, conflagrations, sort of the insinuation that he was a pedophile, conflagrated into, like, I don't know, like a court case here and there that had reasonably high publicity in England. Um, yeah, he was like friends with Alfred Lord Tennyson. I mean, he was like all over the map. So he must have been almost as famous as it gets if he's friends with Alfred Lord Tennyson, right? Like that's pretty famous. So that tells you a lot about what the world used to be like. If one of the most imaginative writers was just like a fully fledged, like little girl fucker, and then now, the most successful fantasy writers are like decidedly not that. But if anything, J.K. Rowling is like a little too perfect. Maybe we should find out that she's into like BDSM or something. I mean, that'd be like a little bit, juicy at least. Spice it up, J.K. Jeez. Okay. Well, this is I'm feeling long in the tooth. It's an hour and 21 minutes and 45 seconds, and in almost 10 seconds, it'll be an hour and 22. I hate to sort of trash all these characters that I know and love, but what are you gonna do in an hour and 22-minute podcast? It's like you can't just write a sonnet for every one of them. Although maybe one day I'll do that just as a goof and a lark, and in my ever evolving love affair for the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. All right, good night, folks, and good luck.